Hello, and welcome to Question in a Bottle. In this series of short discussions, private investor Mark Atkinson answers questions sent in by listeners and subscribers to his main podcast, The Desert Island Investor. So, let's take a look and see what's in the bottle that washed up on the beach today.
Well, Happy New Year, Paul, and a Happy New Year to all our supporters, one of which is Ormerod Green. And Ormerod has sent us a question. He has put in a recent LinkedIn post, you said that you were thinking of moving to the Maldives for tax purposes. Do you not think that you will be abandoning the UK by becoming an exile in a tax haven? Well, firstly, on this is a very large dollop of do your own research, and I'm not dispensing advice as I'm very much seeking advice and on the first tentative steps of this journey. And I'm actually hoping that people more versant from this world or with this world will reach out to help me. But I'll just share what is my, shall we call my understanding. A couple of points, Ormerod. I actually mentioned Mauritius and not the Maldives, Mauritius, where I spend a large part of the winter. And it may sound a little hackneyed, but I actually feel that the UK has really abandoned me. Now, we are spending 3 months away from the UK, 2 of which are in Mauritius, which is a very tax-friendly environment. But as UK tax residents, obviously, we do not see much benefit from this. Now, Elaine and I have spoken in the past about the possibility of relocating. It offers a number of benefits, not least the climate, which lends itself to being as being more physically active, paring back on the calories and not prone to that winter flu. And it's also a more conservative approach to life here, which is more in keeping with ours. But there are a number of practical and psychological considerations that are not insignificant. Now, given my net wealth and the way I've managed my affairs, this has meant that previously moving for tax reasons would not necessarily have made the upheaval cost effective. That is until the impact of the last budget, which will bring both my pension into my estate for inheritance tax considerations and also the tax relief being halved on AIM shares to an effective 20% rate. Now, this is a game changer. And now there is sufficient monetary incentive for me to consider relocating. Now, on the Desert Island Investor, we're not in the habit of talking personal numbers, but I will consider myself very much to be towards the bottom end of the wealth tax exile threat. So if I'm seriously considering it, then what about those with multiples that I have invested? And I do think there is significant flight risk of capital from the UK. So the phrases tax havens and tax exiles are very loaded terms. Now, tax havens are not a defined category. They generally refer to countries with very low rates of tax, often island states, and these often have limited domestic economies who are welcoming wealth being transferred to their jurisdiction, and expats will come and spend their money, and this will help assist the wider economy and their people. Now, they have a low rate of tax, but this is money that they would otherwise not receive, so it's a nice windfall. And tax exiles is another pejorative term. It's often associated with illegality or being somehow a traitor to your home nation. And I state now that I'm strongly against tax evasion. I've always played things with a straight bat, often to my cost. But I see no harm in legally moving somewhere where the tax system is more benign and being something of a tax shopper. So if we look at Mauritius, it has got a tiered income tax system. There is a personal allowance, after which income tax starts at 2%, and then there's increments at every 2% up to a 20% top rate. Now, interestingly, income derived from outside Mauritius is taxable only to the extent that it's received in Mauritius. There's no capital gains tax. VAT is 15%. And whilst the UK has an inheritance tax rate of 40%, That's 40%. In Mauritius, it's 0. So that is some differential. Now, there are several different ways to gain Mauritian residency, and the one that I'm exploring, as I'm over 50, I can apply for a retirement permit. Now, this involves depositing the equivalent of $1,500 a month into a Mauritius bank account, and there is also a one-off processing fee of $1,000 for me and $400 for Elaine in her capacity as my dependent. Now, I would say that I think that financial bar is quite low for what it potentially offers. Now, remember, I'm depositing this money for us to spend or invest for ourselves. That $1,500 a month is not a fee to be given away. So ahead of depositing any money, I first need a Mauritius bank account. And given the amount of time we spend here, I thought it would be handy to have a local account. And I attempted this last year. So I brought all the information I was asked to, utility bills, passport, reference letter from a bank and 6-month bank statement. However, I was told that I had not had the bank letters countersigned by a solicitor. Now, I was not originally told this. So this time I came suitably armed and I've opened an account with a purely nominal amount. Now, interestingly, I had a meeting last year with a company called St. Lawrence Management in the capital Port Louis, and they offer various financial services. And they said they could assist me, amongst other things, in opening a local bank account. And in an email they sent me, they said, you may open a personal bank account in Mauritius. However, the bank will request us, as a management company licensed by the Financial Services Commission, to act as eligible introducer. My colleague, copied hereunder, would initiate discussions with you and request for documentation to start the process. Our fee for this assignment is $750 as well as $300 to be billed on an annual basis to act as eligible introducer. Well, I didn't require an eligible introducer. I opened the account myself and therefore did not need to shell out the $750. And can you believe that they wanted an extra $300 per annum? For what? You know, it's a bit like buying a cabbage for £1 and then paying the supermarket an extra 20 pence every year for the privilege. I suppose it's a case if you don't ask, then you don't get. And some unsuspecting people nevertheless think that they're legally obliged to pay an annual fee for a service that was once performed. So I'm now geared up for the next step, next winter, when I can start the process online and then complete when we are back in Mauritius, when I have to bring further documentation, birth and marriage certificates, for example, medical certificates, and a police certificate of character. And well, that should prove interesting. And these are the baby steps. Now, by gaining the right to residency, I do not actually have to be a resident, but should I decide that the moment is right, I can throw the big switch and slip into gear quickly. And I think this could be a very reassuring option to have in my locker, especially if circumstances change suddenly. And this is a long-winded process, and it will mean that I'm not starting from scratch. Now, a lot has been made of clamping down on non-DOMs, and in the budget, the Chancellor stated that taxation will become residency-based. Now, this could become very interesting for Brits abroad, and particularly, from my point of view, inheritance tax. And it makes me wonder, in pursuit of capturing the non-DOMs, how much they could potentially lose off the other side of the equation. So whereas on an annual basis you can become a non-UK tax resident, upon death, commonly due to the rules of domicile, the estate will fall back under HMRC and inheritance tax. Now, you can run and you can hide, but ultimately HMRC will get you in the end. So I've been investigating domicile, and it appears very difficult to extricate yourself from it. And it's a very difficult dance involving severing all ties with the UK. Now, the most famous example was the actor Richard Burton, and apparently he lived and paid taxes in Switzerland for 27 years. And he was buried in Switzerland, but he made a couple of errors which HMRC pounced on. He bought a burial plot in Wales, which was not used. He was buried in Switzerland. but he had the Welsh flag on his coffin and a copy of Dylan Thomas's poems. Now, this was enough for HMRC to prove that Burton had not sufficiently severed emotional ties with the UK, and his estate paid a tax bill of £2.4 million, and that was back in 1984. So you can never really be sure if you're out of the net until you're dead. And let's face it, HMRC has no motivation to find in your favour, and I'm sure any tenuous connection that could be used to trip you up and find an emotional tie, perhaps retaining your membership or making a donation to the local cricket club. So as I understand it, there will be a more clear-cut system, and that after 10 years as a non-UK tax resident, I would fall out of inheritance tax for my non-UK assets. Now, we're in a good position. We're not shackled to the UK through employment, and hopefully, given our ages, we're not yet 60, an actuary will give us a good chance of one of us surviving a further 10 years. Now, a further interesting point, as I understand it, is after 10 years as a non-UK tax resident, then I will be exempted from the 7-year rule if I gifted money ahead of returning to the UK, should I wish to do so or have to for any reason. Whereas I would normally have to survive a full 7 years so that any gifts are exempt from inheritance tax. Now, another interesting angle I'm exploring is running down the pension whilst being a non-UK tax resident. Now, presumably, I could move to the United Arab Emirates where there is a zero income tax rate and bust my pension rather than pay 20, 40 or 45% here in the UK, or leave it until my death where it's taxed at 40% inheritance tax, and then subsequently taxed again by my children if they take it as income, which can be as much as a further 45%. So just taking round numbers for every £100,000 that will be left over, 40% go inheritance tax, leaving 60,000. Then it could be taxed potentially again at 45%, leaving 33,000. That's an effective 67% tax take. Now, if I subsequently returned to the UK after emptying the pension, I was knocked down by a steamroller and had deposited that money in a bank account, yes, the state will still receive its 40% inheritance tax, but then my children won't be subsequently taxed again in order to access it. Now, so I know many find this a controversial topic, and where one person has said, why don't you just pay your fair share? Well, to be honest, I think I always have paid my fair share, and at times my unfair share. So we've just touched on what is a massive subject with lots of nuances, and please let us know if you'd like us to go deeper as I continue my research and my journey. And just to say, Ormerod, I hope that's of some interest, and thanks for your question.
Well, that's all for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember the content is for information only and it is not financial advice. If you have a question for Mark for our Question in a Bottle podcast, just complete the form on our website, thedesertislandinvestor.co.uk. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.